How come I end up where I started? How come I end up where I went wrong? Won't take my eyes off the ball again. You reel me out, then you turn on Columbia House Party. Jake, what's going on?
Oh, you know.
Some of those are getting longer.
I like it.
We've had a couple good full verse
When we
openers.
finally hit our Mountain Goats episode, it'll just be like a full paragraph.
Just me reading a book before we get into the intro.
That'll be good.
How you doing, man?
I'm okay. You know, on my third coffee of the morning, so it's always a good way to start things. This is a big one, too.
Yeah, I didn't know what size you wanted.
That's fair. I'm sure I'll just be jittering and weird by the end of this.
Had you not been 25 minutes late, you could have picked your own coffee
Look,
size.
the bus just didn't show up.
All right.
Well, it did, and they said it wasn't in service, but it's fine. This, I feel like jittering and shaking with coffee is appropriate for the episode today.
Yeah, I would say it's appropriate. Plus, we can get our asses carried by a really good guest that we have.
That's true. I love to ride coattails. That's every podcast I do.
Especially these ones with a guest. I don't think you ride mine often, but
I ride, buddy. Come on.
tee us up, man. This is your episode. What do we got today?
So in 2006, I loved Radiohead. Still do, but like that like high school love of a band. Also because I feel like Radiohead were sort of, as a mostly emo and pop punk kid, Radiohead were my like cred band because they were like artistic and cool.
See, I don't just like that weird stuff. I also like this really...
Exactly.
Not only am I deep, I'm also really cool.
I like electronic blips and beeps too, guys, not just power chords. But in 2006, at arguably the peak of my Radiohead fandom, Radiohead announced two shows in Toronto at the then Hummingbird Center, which I believe then became the Sony Center, which is now
Meridian,
I think. And this was like 2006, so we didn't really have as much internet discussion back then, so it was kind of going in blind. Like Setlist FM, I don't think was really a thing yet.
Yeah,
so
maybe not on music.
Maybe not on music, but
wrestling online was popping though. The internet wrestling community, trust me.
So my friend and I went to this show. We got tickets in the very, very back row of the theater, and the show started off sort of like any other Radiohead shows you would expect. Some of the hits, some whatever, and then they started playing a bunch of songs that we had never heard before. And no one had ever heard before, unless you had been to the other dates on this tour. Everyone was very confused, but very excited. Because it was like, Radiohead, we thought it was just a theater tour. Like, Radiohead's doing theaters. This is so cool. And they played all these new songs.
Which is simultaneously like awesome but jarring.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, it's cool that I'm getting to experience this, but I can't sing along and I don't know what the hell these songs are.
That was exactly it. Because it's Radiohead too. So everyone's like, I feel like, especially in 2006, if you were a Radiohead fan getting tickets to this like 3,000 seat theater, see Radiohead.
I'm gonna sing every word.
Exactly. So
I'm gonna kind of dance, but really just like sway tapping one heel.
Yeah. So I have the set list here. The first three songs everyone knew. Then the next two no one had heard before, and it was very confusing but very great. And it felt like we were in on something cool.
You have the set list from the show, eh?
Well, on the internet. The internet has the set list. I just pulled it up. But
you just invalidated your earlier comment about how there was no set list FM
in 2006.
Yeah.
I'm saying people have updated since.
So people just like remember set lists from that far back?
Man, Setlist FM have stuff in like the 60s.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So this show happened, and then we left the show. It was in the summer, and we left the show being like, what was any of that? Cut to 6 months later, and all of a sudden, literally out of nowhere, this album was released on the internet for free, which was a whole thing. And so today, we're talking about that album, which is from that show and from that release, which is Radiohead's In Rainbows.
Fishes. Great song name.
I love that song. Also, I never understood why there's like the slash, like Weird Fishes slash arpeggio. It never made sense to me, but it is a very good song.
Luckily, we have someone on today who can make sense out of a lot of
Explain
stuff for us. Guys, we're joined today, and we made him wait through that lengthy intro before tagging him in here. Josh Terry. Josh, welcome, man.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
I'm
Thanks
doing
for being
well.
here, man.
Excellent that you're here. I'm happy to have you in the city.
Yeah.
We
Love Toronto.
had never met before right now.
Really?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh,
long time internet friends and fantasy baseball competitors.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. The Fantasy Baseball League that I'm definitely a part of and don't participate in.
Yeah, that's I love you for that. Yeah.
Easy wins every week.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, Steve and I were arguing about that league last night. He was like trying to retcon that like the reason he didn't do well this year was because like, oh, he didn't pay that much attention to the draft. I'm like, dude, I missed the draft.
Yeah,
like you can't. It's a free fantasy baseball league. You either win or you don't.
I think
There's
we're going to
no-
like year 4. I don't think I've been there for the draft once.
No stakes. For anyone who doesn't know, and I'm sure you do, Josh is a music writer, primarily advice. He's also had bylines at Billboard, Vinyl Me Please, Consequence of Sound, and everywhere else with good music content because Josh brings that good music content. He is, Josh, I don't know if you know this, you are one of my go-tos for like, if you recommend a band, I will 100% check them out. You can follow Josh on Twitter at Josh H. Terry. Josh, man, thanks so much for coming.
Oh man, this is so much fun. Yeah, it's great to be here, and let's talk about Radiohead.
Before we talk about Radiohead, I actually have a general music journalism question for you. Actually, it is Radiohead adjacent, but you have that occasional column where you will have someone listen to an album for the first time.
Oh yeah.
I remember you did that for Kid A by Radiohead with Brendan Kelly of the Lawrence Arms. That idea of this person is listening to this for the first time is something that like when we were coming up with the concept for this podcast, we were like, maybe we could do that once in a while. I was like, that's Josh's thing. It's such a good idea though.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of became, the column is called Blind Spots. It's currently on Vice.com. Started when I was a music reporter for the Chicago Tribune's free daily paper called The Red Eye. So basically it just came out of me not wanting to do this typical album cycle interview, you know, where it's like, oh, what are your influences on this record? Or like any cool stories from the road, you know, like that stuff is so played out. And it's also just like the reason why I wanted to be a music journalist in the first place is that I spent just way too much time growing up showing my friends records and sort of just like talking them through it as they listen. You know, it's like that impulse is sort of like, you know, might as well make a career out of that.
Yeah.
And so, so the column has become really fun thing. Brendan Kelly of the Lawrence Arms, he is a friend of mine in Chicago. Used to be my bartender at the time I wrote that.
Perfect.
Yeah. And he liked the column idea, but he was saying, there's so much I haven't heard. Pick the thing that I'm going to hate the most.
Oh, no.
And, so we kind of, I didn't want to go too like into just something that is going to be miserable for him. I actually kind of wanted to like show him that
Maybe
cred
he'll
record,
like
you know,
something,
like, and I like had a feeling that like he would like it. I really did. I knew he would like shoot off all the jokes before he listened, but when we sat down and like listened to Kid A, I saw 14-year-old me in Brendan Kelly.
Amazing.
Seeing his mind sort of expand a little bit. And yeah, it's been a really fun series. Like it's the kind of the nicest way to get to know someone too, is to just like listen to a record.
I mean, that's how I relate to new people, or like, you know, the odd time I have feelings for someone. It's like, hey, here's someone else putting this into context, and like, let's share that. Because I'm not going to.
The day after I met my fiance, I made her like a 3-hour playlist being like, this is everything about me.
Yeah.
Oh yes, your whole playlist thing of the mixtapes being about you and not the other person.
Yeah. Get to know me. I don't need to get to know you.
Yeah.
Anyway, the gimmick's great, and I love those columns. We didn't do it on the pod, but I think Lil Wayne you had never listened to the Carter 3 before.
Great record.
Before we recorded a Carter 3 one.
It
So
wasn't quite as like as the first listen.
Yeah, like you'd heard the singles
Yeah.
and you knew who Lil Wayne was. But yeah, and obviously we didn't listen to it on air, but the prep for that episode was the first time Jake had ever. So you made Brendan Kelly listen to Kid A, but today we're doing In Rainbows. Josh, we kind of opened it to you to pick a couple albums you might want to do, and we picked from there. Why was In Rainbows high on your list?
My high school experience is that I was sort of like the record kid. Like I went to a pretty like religious high school, so there wasn't really like a group of like people who were my friends who listened to music that was, you know,
They were just listening to like
Yeah.
Emery and
like
POD and
Reliant K and stuff was like sort of like the thing that I could get people on board with. And then it was like, here's this weird computer band that I like, you know. But like I really like kind of just leaned into it. Like Radiohead was sort of the first band for me where I sort of like made that band kind of my identity, my love for that band. It was sort of, I loved a lot of other bands, but this was the first band where I was like, I want to know everything.
So is that like in terms of your identity, and you were the record guy at this school because you kind of latched onto Radiohead as your kind of identifying band? Did that then like everyone who then thought of like record guys was then like, oh, everyone who collects record is a Radiohead fan? Is that did they kind of take that on?
Yeah, I mean,
It's also not wrong.
yeah, it's definitely not wrong. Like,
Look,
it's just like I was a stereotype in a Baptist school in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and now everyone has the
Grand
rights.
Rapids, eh?
Yeah, Grand Rapids. Yeah, I'm
Wonderful G League program.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where where now it's Spotify playlist. Back then, if I had a crush on someone, I'd definitely burn them a mix CD. And so, there are a lot of formerly evangelical Christians who are now big Radiohead fans because
of you.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Do they play Grand Rapids when
They never-
there's just this huge Radiohead hive?
It was it was a total I don't think they've ever played Grand Rapids. They maybe did on the last tour, but I'm not sure.
Interesting, Michigan. Like I bet Battle Creek is a new metal city for sure.
Oh,
Because
100%.
that's called Battle Creek.
Well, it was sort of like Grand Rapids. The bands that we're known for are Mustard Plug and Law Dispute. And so Law Dispute was like coming up when I was like living there and like in high school.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and they've been a band for like 15 years.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wild.
How big is Grand Rapids population?
Metropolitan area, it's like probably 200,000.
Okay,
Like,
so it's not that much bigger than Cambridge.
yeah, it was a weird place to grow up. It was, the music scene was very like scene emo when I was growing up.
Okay.
Which wasn't ever like, I was sort of like always kind of flirting with it, but never like full like I'm gonna listen to Cheetos or something. Kind of really embarrassing. So it was when you go to shows, it was sort of like, all right, who's playing? You
Right.
don't necessarily like the bands. It's just like, all right, that's a show.
Yeah, it's the experience.
Yeah. So Radiohead was kind of nice because it was like maybe one day a band like Radiohead will play Grand. Never happened.
Never happened.
But,
Or I'll
yeah.
get out of here and get to a city where they will play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why In Rainbows as the album from them that you wanted to do?
Well, I started being a Radiohead fan kind of like after Hail to the Thief. I think Hail to the Thief had been out for a few months, and then I had heard Airbag, the first song on OK Computer, and it kind of blew my mind. And then I just kind of like went into it from there, and went through the entire discography front to back so many different times. Like spent too much money on like CD EPs from Russia of like B-sides and stuff, only to have them reissued like less than a year later for $7 at Best Buy.
Japanese comm lag.
Yeah, it was like that. I just sort of like was so completist about it in a way where I haven't really been. And so In Rainbows was really sort of a formative record for me because this was like, I've had a lot of favorite bands, and most of my experience at that point was like, all right, they're going to release an album, but it's probably not going to be as good as the first couple records, And so there was like so much just anticipation to be like, how are they going to follow up Hail to the Thief? I had already invested so much effort and energy just like going through the discography that it was sort of just like, there was like graduating high school. I was excited to do that. But then on top of that, the biggest thing was like, all right, I'm going to listen to In Rainbows. It's going to come out. And like, I was like, on the message boards and like, being like, ooh, they played this new song on the tour, and just being a complete insufferable nerd about it. So when they announced
the first person on this podcast to be an insufferable nerd about a band.
Exactly. And so I think I chose In Rainbows because, as far as I know, it was the first record that like delivered on my obscenely high expectations. The whole rollout, the fact that I think they announced it like 10 days before it actually came out. Staying up and then falling asleep and then like waking up frantically to download it before going to school, and like sitting in the parking lot for like a half hour after school starts, just like still listening, It was just like, it's one of the most like nostalgic records for me, just because it was just the most excited I had been for music at that point in my life.
All right, we're going to get into In Rainbows after this. All right, Jake, so set us up here.
Very quickly, band formed in 1985. They were called on a Friday. When they signed to a label, they changed the name to Radiohead.
Which, by the way, sorry to cut you off immediately after you
It's
start
fine.
this.
No, it's fine. Whatever.
Most band names suck. Radiohead is a really good band name.
Stolen from a Talking Head song. That's why. Because everything David Byrne does is pretty smart.
There you go.
So they released Pablo Honey in 1993, which is like a perennially underrated record, in my opinion, even though because Radiohead's discography is so good, it's now like a thing to say, that's their Pablo Honey, even though if any other band released Pablo Honey, it'd be like, that record rules. They released The Bends in 1995, OK Computer in 1997, which of course is, as we say on this show, an album that insists upon itself. Their first number one hit, Paranoid Android, Karma Police, held up as one of, if not the best album of the 90s. I found this funny. According to Acclaim Music, which uses statistics to represent critic scores, OK Computer is the 8th most celebrated album of all time. They recorded for 18 months to release Kid A in 2000, which, as we all know, changed their sound entirely, became their first number one hit in the US. It became the first Radiohead album to debut atop the Billboard chart and the first US number one album by any UK act since the Spice Girls in 1996. It was also, as a sort of foreshadowing of what In Rainbows would be, it was leaked on Napster several months before release, and they were also one of the first rock bands to have their own website, which I didn't know. I also have some quotes here from Pitchfork's Kid A review, because it's my favorite review of all time. It starts, I had never even seen a shooting star before. 25 years of rotations passes through comets' paths and travel. And to my memory, I had never witnessed burning debris scratched across the night sky. Radiohead were hunched over their instruments. Tom York slowly beat a grand piano, singing, eyes closed, into his microphone like he was trying to kiss around a big nose. Colin Greenwood tapped patiently on a double bass, waiting for his cue. It's cacophonous yet tranquil, experimental yet familiar, foreign yet womb-like, spacious yet visceral, textured yet vaporous, awakening yet dreamlike, infinite yet 48 minutes. That's my favorite one. It will cleanse your brain of those little crustaceans of worries and inferior albums clinging inside the fold of your gray matter. The harrowing sounds hit from unseen angles and emanate with inhuman genesis.
You joke, but when I first read that, I was like, I want to be a music journalist. That sounds awesome.
Absolutely.
Like, this guy's probably on the best drugs. Gets to see Radiohead in Italy.
He put me right in that vaporous womb.
Yeah, it's the peak of like saying a lot with saying nothing. But to your point, when you're, 16, and you read that review, you're like, oh yeah, that's totally what Radiohead sounds like. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's also what smoking weed sounds like at 16.
That writer used to live in Chicago, and we were at different local media publications. And I remember seeing him at a party one time and being like, don't ask him about the review. Don't ask him about Radiohead. Like,
it is this weird, I think it speaks like the massiveness of Kid A, that like everything surrounding it became like one of the most famous album reviews of all time. Right. And it's an album review.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of crazy in a way. It also speaks to the time, I suppose. But anyway, Kid A has been named the best album of the 2000s by Pitchfork, The Times, and Rolling Stone. Amnesiac was released in 2001, which was comprised of tracks from the Kid A sessions. It also topped the UK album chart and reached number 2 in the US. In June 2003, they released Hail to the Thief, influenced by what Tom York called a general sense of ignorance and intolerance and panic and stupidity following the election of George W. Bush. Following the Hail to the Thief tour, the band went on hiatus to spend time with their families and perform their solo work. And other than one song on a charity compilation, pre-In Rainbows, the last time anyone heard Radiohead, they sounded like this.
Dragging out your window, dragging out the dead, singing a mess. You snakes and let us lift the lid. Eye pops the cracker, snaps you in the head, naps you in the neck, kicks you in the teeth, steel toe caps, takes all your credit cards. Get up, get the guns, get the eggs, get the flat in the face, the flat in the face, the flat in the face. Dance you fucker, don't you dare, don't you dare, don't you flat in the face. Take it with the love it's given, take it with a pinch of salt, take it to the tax now. Let me back, I promise to be good. Don't look in the mirror at the face you don't recognize. Help me call the doctor, put me inside, put me inside, put me inside, put me inside, put me inside. I keep the world from the door. It calls me on the phone, tells me all the ways that he's gonna mess me up. Still all my children.
That is Wolf at the Door, the final track on Hail to the Thief. And one of my favorite Radiohead songs.
Really good song.
They played it at the In Rainbows tour show in Toronto, and I lost my mind because I did not expect to hear it. So, on the hiatus, Phil Selway, the always underrated drummer of Radiohead, said, "It was definitely time to take a break. There was still a desire amongst us to make music, but also a realization that other aspects of our lives were being neglected. And we'd come to the end of our contract, which gives you a natural point to look back over at what you've achieved as a band." Tom York would release his solo album, The Eraser, in 2006. Johnny Greenwood would score the film There Will Be Blood in that time as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Because Johnny Greenwood kicks ass.
Yeah. It makes complete sense why that's Steve's favorite movie, too.
That does make sense. Oh, a bunch of noise from the guitarist of Radiohead?
Yeah. I had no idea.
Yeah. I definitely tried really hard to get into that soundtrack at that time because I was like, oh, Johnny Greenwood and There Will Be Blood. I'm so arty. And I was like, oh, I don't get it. Oh, no.
Am I dumb? Am I lame?
I swear, 2007 was such a good year for my Radiohead fandom.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Also just being like, thinking I understand Paul Thomas Anderson
Totally.
movies at 16. Yeah.
Radiohead began recording for the In Rainbow sessions without Nigel Godrich, their longtime producer. Ed O'Brien told NME it was to get us out of our comfort zone because we've been working together for 10 years and love one another too much. Colin Greenwood would later deny this, saying it's just that Godrich was busy. So, who knows? The recording began in 2005, and the band started up a blog called Dead Airspace to keep fans updated, which in 2005 was kind of a novel thing to do. Now, we all have it.
Radiohead did a lot of that, like novel, hey, we're figuring out the internet kind of
Yeah.
ahead of everyone. And I know it's a big part of what we're going to talk about with
Other than
the
like
Rainbows. But
the In Rainbows of it all, I didn't realize how forward they were
even now,
technologically, so to speak. Yes, even now.
with their recent, Radiohead library being released online.
And like the OK Computer, whatever that was, mini disc sessions, there's like, here, have it. And they've always been more ahead of the curve non-musically than I think I gave them credit for.
They're musicians second, posters first.
Yeah.
Chronically online.
They post with honor.
Yeah.
Tom York is one of the first like heavy online celebrities, I guess.
It's literal galaxy brain in action. It's like,
Yeah.
what if we give the album away? Boom.
Just the Tim and Eric gif.
Yeah.
At the time, Radiohead were considered the world's most popular unsigned band. Tom York in 2006 told the New York Times, "Why would you want to sign a 6-album deal with a business that's imploding?" Which, as they foresaw as well. Recording was stalled and slow in the In Rainbow sessions. Tom York said, "We lost all momentum and it's very, very difficult to get momentum back. When I say momentum, I don't just mean the physically working every day. I mean just hanging out and playing each other's music and swapping ideas. It's something that you take for granted until it's gone, and then you're like, what's wrong? There's something wrong here." In March 2016, on Dead Airspace, Tom York posted, "Tearing my hair out, too much at once. Furiously writing, working out parts, cracking up. Not much time left. Unsure about everything. I'm not supposed to put any of this here, so that's why I am." Because Tom York's deep and cool.
That's a drill tweet. That's what that is.
Ed O'Brien told Mojo the band considered splitting up at the time because he said, "When you get beyond all the shit and the bollocks, the core of these songs were really good." That's why they didn't split up, sorry. I also like how British they are in interviews and how not British they are in everything else about them. They're like, all these quotes, like just arse and bollocks all the time. It's great. To break the deadlock, the band embarked on the aforementioned 2006 tour where they performed new songs. Tom York told the New York Times that we basically had all these half-formed songs and we just had to get it together. And rather than it being a nightmare, it was really, really good fun because suddenly everyone is being spontaneous and no one's self-conscious because you're not in the studio. It felt like being 16 again. One of those songs, which they played at the Hummingbird show, which sounded nothing like any Radiohead song I heard before and confused the shit out of me. Tom York actually played drums and sang on the same time, was this song.
Cash, got on in a club, baby.
That was a song called Bangers and Mash, which actually did not make In Rainbows proper, but is on the deluxe edition on In Rainbows Disc 2, in quotes.
I like that you set up just how British they are, saying things like arse and bollocks, and then played a track called Bangers and Mash.
Yes.
It's
a song that I
stick to it.
To
guys.
this day, as much as I love In Rainbows proper, and I think it's so good, I wish that song had made it, because I feel people, as much as Radiohead's known for being like, what is this? I feel like that song is very ahead of its time almost. Like it sounds a lot like sort of the noisier dance punk rock that would come out 2 years later.
Yeah, it's on like captured tracks. It's like
Yeah.
exploding in sound. Like, yeah, I love that song. The disc 2 was such a nice surprise. And
Yeah.
I was like such a nerd where I like, the whole release of the record was pay what you want. I also got the deluxe version and still like threw the
Same.
band like $20. I'm like, I just want to support the guys.
I think it's
Yeah.
the most expensive vinyl I own, even though it was like $20 at the time.
Right. And yeah, the values just increased so much and I've used it just all the time.
Yeah. Like you, I was the one tracking like, what are the new songs? And so many of those new songs didn't end up on the record and ended
Right.
up on the second disc. And I was like, oh, where can I get these studio versions? I need
I was
them.
gonna say I could absolutely see you Jake at the time this album came out, like digging in before you've even really given it a deep listen of just like, oh, the deluxe second album's even better.
Oh, yeah.
And telling
yeah.
literally anyone who will listen.
You haven't heard Down is the New Up? Are you kidding me? Yeah, absolutely. I was that guy. Weird how you knew that. After the tour, the band scrapped all their material and went back to studio with Nigel Godrich. York told XFM that working with Godrich gave the band a walloping kick in the arse, which rules. The re-recording started at Tottenham House in Marlborough, Wiltshire. That's an English sentence, where the band recorded for 3 weeks. They lived in caravans because the building they were recording in was unsafe and in a state of disrepair. York told XFM that it was derelict in the stricter sense of the word, where there's holes in the floor, rain coming through the ceilings, half the windows panes missing. There are places you just basically didn't go.
That description sounds like a Radiohead song.
It does.
Yeah.
These sessions birthed the songs Jigsaw Falling Into Place and Body Snatchers. And then in October 2006, Tom York wrote on Dead Airspace in a post that was actually about climate change. He has added in at the very end, started the record properly now. Starting to get somewhere, I think. Finally. In December 2006.
You're not going to read us the climate change alarm?
Honestly, it doesn't make a lot of sense. In December 2006, the band moved to Halswell House in Taunton and Nigel Godrich's Hospital Studios, where they recorded Videotape and Nude. So Nude is a song I want to talk about. Radiohead is a band, as Josh, I'm sure you're aware, that has so much material that is not, I guess, commercially available, although a lot of it is now with streaming and everything. But back in the day, they had so much material in their sessions that fans would track it. I remember I think I downloaded it from like Soulseek at the time. It was like a 58 track Radiohead B-sides album of and there's like 7 versions of each song, tracking them throughout the years. So Nude is one of those songs. It was originally called Failure to Receive Payment Will Put Your House at Risk. Then it was called Don't Get Any Big Ideas. Then it was called Big Ideas, and it was first recorded in the OK Computer sessions, and it sounded like this.
that at that time was called Big Ideas, and they recorded it during OK Computer.
Yes.
And it would eventually become Nude.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they also recorded it at the Kid A and Amnesiacs and Hail of the Thief sessions as well.
So they just like kept playing with it and
For a
like
decade.
knew it was a song, but couldn't get there.
Yeah. So I want to talk about two things with this song. One is this quote from Nigel Godrich in 2008 to Word Magazine, where he says, "Songs have kind of a window where they're really most alive and you have to capture it. Nude missed its window and took a lot of reinvention to bring it back to the place where we could capture it again in a way that resonated for the people playing it. It was essentially the same song. Nothing had really changed. What had changed are the people playing it." So I think that's a really interesting idea and an interesting way to think about songs, because we don't really like this idea of a song being worked on for a decade before finally being put out. I just think it's an interesting way to look at like a song as a thing.
Yeah, and especially the part, like the element of him talking about like the band members and as musicians kind of had to grow into it, which is weird because it almost suggests that when they wrote it initially and tried to perform it, they were kind of out-kicking where they were at that point. Like the songwriting was just ahead of where they were, which is a crazy thing to think about Radiohead, but the way he frames that is kind of what it makes it sound like.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too when you listen to the two versions how the changes are very subtle other than that bass line, but like the Big Ideas version sounds like an OK Computer song, and the Nude is very much its own thing, and how just these subtle changes changes the entire presentation of the idea
and changes which Radiohead album it would fit on.
Exactly.
Which,
Yeah, exactly.
You know, to the earlier conversation, Tom York kind of does that, right? It's like, a couple albums and then I'm going to switch it up.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting representation of the band itself, and it's a song that I didn't used to love all that much, but it's grown on me as a song, and also learning about its sort of like.
So you had to grow into it too.
Yeah.
You weren't ready for the song.
Yeah. In 2007, this came out. It was kind of the like lull for me in the album, even though it was like a nice song, but I don't know.
The thing for me about this record is that I think more than most Radiohead albums, that this is Colin Greenwood's record.
Yeah.
Like he has the coolest bass lines on Nude, All I Need, 15 Step, like towards he kills it on every single thing. And just the way that he just sort of adds this groove, this kind of like, no one's really ever described Radiohead as a sexy band, but these are like the sexiest Radiohead songs in their collection.
Nude is the sexiest Radiohead song. How perfect.
Yeah, well, I would say All I Need is probably like. Yeah,
but I feel like I think like Radiohead always get, it's always Tom York and Johnny Greenwood. Right. Fair enough. But I feel like their rhythm section doesn't get enough credit. Like Phil Selway, his drum beats are simple, but they're like, he does it for the entire fucking song.
Yeah.
It's so consistent and holds everything together, I feel like. And I think to your point, like Colin Greenwood being allowed to sort of stretch that muscle on this really solidifies it.
And you've seen him live. Colin Greenwood always struck me as like Radiohead's biggest fan. Like if you've seen him on stage, he's just so happy to be there. Like
especially in a band that's a bunch of morose fucks. And he's just like jumping around.
His online presence, like I remember in high school, he had like a book blog. He's like, here's what I'm reading right now. It just seems delightful.
He's reading books about Radiohead.
So the band finished recording In Rainbows in June of 2007 and began posting clips of their songs on Dead Airspace. The sessions produced 16 songs, plus a song called Last Flowers, which is a leftover from Tom York's Eraser sessions, and it's a gorgeous song.
Can I ask an ignorant question here? I've never listened to Tom York's solo stuff. How much does it just sound like a different Radiohead album?
The Eraser does. I don't think the rest of them do.
Yeah. It's really on that bleep bloop kind of tip.
Okay.
So it
bleep
depends on how you feel about the like King of Limbs, and then
yeah. And I also think that like Tom, it's one of those solo albums where like, because so much of Radiohead's sound is tied into Tom York's voice,
right? It's
hard to not be like, this sounds like Radiohead, even if it kind of doesn't. But the Eraser definitely sounds like Radiohead.
Yeah, the Eraser rules.
Yeah, it's so good.
I will check it out.
The band felt that Hail the Thief was too long, so they decided to try and simplify this one. So they cut it down to 10 songs, saving the rest for the limited edition. They said they took influence from a lot of art rock and art pop for this record. I did not know this part. The song 15 Step, which opens the album, they said was influenced by Peach's Fuck the Pain Away, which I don't know if I totally hear, but I get it. The band, to make this song, recorded a group of children from the Matrix Music School and Art Center in Oxford to record the hand claps But they felt that the hand claps weren't enough for the kids. They also got them just to yell randomly and put into parts of the song, and it sounds like this.
I can't end up where I started. I can't end up where I went. Won't take my eyes off the ball again. You reel me out, then you cut the string.
Badly I wanted to sing that as the opening line at the top of the podcast today.
Yeah, that was the first new track they played at that show in 2006. Like, it was like the fourth song of the show, and everyone was like, "This rules! Oh my god, what is this?"
It's an unbelievable. It not only like great first debut to an audience, but like such a killer album opener.
Yeah,
too. It's so good.
I remember, like, I've said this before on the show that I was like the live bootleg kid. I listened to almost more live music than I did records when I was in high school. And Radiohead has an extremely dedicated taping community, which isn't a surprise. And they recorded that show that I was at, and I listened to it all the time. And then I remember when In Rainbows came out and they released the track list, it was like, oh, which of these songs is on? It was so exciting. Tom York told NME that the album's lyrics are based on that anonymous fear thing, sitting in traffic thinking, I'm sure I'm supposed to be doing something else. It's similar to OK Computer in a way, but much more terrifying. He also told The Observer that the album's about the fucking panic of realizing you're gonna die, and that anytime soon, I could possibly have a heart attack when I go for a run. Ed O'Brien, always contradicting Tom York, told BBC Six Music that the lyrics are universal, there's no political agenda, it's about being human. So, In Rainbows came out in October of 2007. We can't really talk about In Rainbows without talking about how it came out, because it's almost become bigger than, at least at the time, it was almost bigger than the album itself. So on October 1st, 2007, Johnny Greenwood wrote a post on Dead Airspace saying, the new album is finished and it's coming out in 10 days. We've called it In Rainbows. I think like you, Josh, I remember seeing that post. I was sitting in my dorm's common room and saw that post and just like freaked out. It was like, what? We have a new Radiohead album in 10 days? What's happening? The post contained a link where fans could pre-order the album. They could also download the album for any price, including free. Colin Greenwood said this was a way of avoiding regulated playlists and the straightened formats of TV and radio. The Pay What You Want release was the first for an act of the band's stature, although bands like Bomb the Music Industry had been releasing music for free for years. I get that like Radiohead were like, of their size, they were the first to do it, but like people have been giving away out music for free for a while now.
Yeah, Jeff Rosenstock's doing it, and then Radiohead's like, but does it scale? Just like being tech bro about it.
Mojo said that it was hailed as a revolution in the way major bands would sell their music. NME said the music world seemed to judder several rhymes off its axis and praised the fact that everyone from fans to critics had access to the album at the same time on release day. The kind of moment of togetherness that you don't get very often, which I do think is true and is a thing we've lost a little bit in streaming culture.
Yeah, now you get a surprise drop in like hip hop.
Yeah. like there was such a unifying thing about holy shit, we all get a new Radiohead album in 10 days.
There was something really great. The first like collective were listening to this at the same time.
Right, because it all clicked in for the download
It's really
at the same time.
like Drake is the only one who does it super well now. I
Yeah.
think like he's the only one who comes
Beyonce.
to mind. Yeah, that's true.
Beyonce and Frank Ocean too.
Oh
yeah, we all watched Frank Ocean painting a wall.
Yeah,
It
that was
Yeah.
so not as fun as.
But I guess
Radiohead.
the Frank Ocean one. The Frank Ocean one is weirder in my memory because it was teased for so long, or not. If not teased, like rumored for so long.
Yeah.
It's like Frank Ocean's doing something.
Mhm.
Whereas I remember at least 2 instances of like I'm doing something and someone texts me and be like, Drake just dropped an album.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
But to the point,
cool.
like
Well,
it wasn't.
I'll stop everything.
It definitely wasn't as fun as Radiohead, but I will never forget the time that everyone just watched him paint a wall.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this the album? What's happening?
Also, he rules, so he could do whatever he
That's
wants.
also
You can,
true.
yeah.
Response to this in the music industry was
Oh, no.
pretty divided.
Yeah.
Bono praised the band as courageous and imaginative in trying to figure out some new relationship with their audience. Trent Reznor said the band didn't go far enough and said it was very much a bait and switch to get you to pay for a MySpace quality stream as a way to promote a very traditional record sale. Reznor would actually back this up the next year when he released his instrumental Ghosts 1 to 4 album under the Creative Commons license, which puts albums out into the public domain as they are released.
Shout out Old Town Road. Which sampled
That's
one of those
right.
songs
There you go.
and became Old Town Road.
And
Yeah.
I remember when he put that out too, his idea was these are all instrumental tracks, build your own songs off them and release them.
That's
which
great.
I think is such a cool way to.
So to
release something.
backtrack a little bit, it's interesting that Bono praised.
Yes, it is.
Because the U2 album that went on everyone's iPhones is like Radiohead kind of indirectly responsible for me still having that record.
I also love that.
on
Like,
my
why did
phone.
everyone feel so slighted by that? Just don't listen to it.
Well, I think it's like it's always just pops up. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like if you like restore your phone, it's always going to be back on your phone.
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
like-
didn't
think
know
there's
that.
an element too of like maybe people didn't realize just how much like the phone companies or the apps that you have can unilaterally do things
Right.
to your device, and people were just like, you can do that. You could just add stuff on here. It's like you could obviously it's just a U2 album. There are worse things they could do to your phone, but
Right.
yeah, I didn't read very closely, and they could just put whatever they want on my phone. That's,
Yeah.
that's
Thanks,
at least a little
Radiohead.
terrifying.
Yeah. And also that album sucks. So,
Yeah.
but whatever. Lily Allen said that it was arrogant. They said Radiohead have millions of pounds. It sends a weird message to younger bands who haven't done as well. You don't choose how to pay for eggs. Why should it be different for music? Kim Gordon said it seemed really community oriented, but it wasn't catered towards their musician brothers and sisters who don't sell as many records as them.
And I'm curious what Lily Allen thinks of like on the music industry.
Yeah.
If she has any thoughts on like when, for smaller bands kind of doing the same thing.
I think that's what's so interesting about this discussion, especially this discussion in 2007.
Mm.
It was kind of impossible for any musician to have without being hypocritical in some way
Right.
because it was such a new sort of idea. And to your point about like, well, music industry, the only band that was doing it was this like small New York ska punk band,
Right.
Which like most people are like, who?
Yeah, exactly.
In a retrospective 10-year anniversary piece in 2017, NME said that the band showed that the best response to music piracy is to explore new legal ways to get music into fans' hands. It didn't kill the idea that music should be paid for. What it did do, though, was show that the idea of setting a single one-size-fits-all price for an album was long overdue a rethink. Not just because of people wanting to pay less or nothing, but because plenty of fans wanted to pay more. Which is true because, as you and I both did, we paid a bunch of money for the special edition anyway.
Suckers.
Yeah,
Absolute
absolutely.
suckers. We're going to talk about how the album itself was received, not just the marketing of the album, how that was received after this. All right, man. So people were very, very split on the method with which this was released, but I think the response to the actual album itself was a little more uniform, right?
Yes, the album received what I would call widespread critical acclaim. NME said that this was Radiohead reconnecting with their human sides, realizing that you can embrace pop melodies and proper instruments while still sounding like paranoid androids. This is otherworldly music, all right. To further that, Rob Sheffield of Rolling Stone said that it had no wasted moments, no weak tracks, just primo Radiohead. And I think the song on the album that sort of best exemplifies that is a song that Tom York said was influenced by Wolfmother, of all bands,
All right.
called Body Snatchers.
I do not understand what it is. I don't know. Full of holes. Check for holes. Blink your eyes. Won't forget till you know. I have no idea what I'm talking about. You lost moves on me with someone's hand on your eyes.
Body Snatchers, by the way, is one of the best examples of my like batting order theory of album structuring.
Mhm.
Bat your best player second.
Yeah. And it does sort of speak to this, like, Radiohead can make a lot of noise, but now they use guitars to do it. Like, it is a noisy, kind of like what Bangers and Mash was. It's just noisy, distorted, unclear. I remember trying to find accurate guitar tabs of that song in 2007 was impossible.
That's a cool thing about Radiohead, that like they're a really good guitar band that also just sometimes doesn't need guitars. It's it's a good dichotomy to have.
The album was ranked the number one album of 2007 by Billboard, Mojo, and Pop Matters, third by NME and the AV Club, fourth by Pitchfork and Q, and sixth by Rolling Stone and Spin. Rolling Stone ranked it at 336 on their top 500 albums of all time. It's also included in the 1001 albums to hear before you die. In 2019, The Guardian named it the 11th best album of the century so far. Pitchfork named it the 21st album of the decade, one of 3 Radiohead albums in their top 25 on that list. ComScore found that people paid an average of $2.26 per download globally. 62% of people paid nothing. But of the people that did pay, the average was between $8 and $11 for the album.
What I would be very curious to know, and I know you don't have the data in front of you, is of those 62% who downloaded it for free, how many of them would, and they would have to self-report this at the time, like, would you have bought the album if it cost money? Or was a huge chunk of that people checking out Radiohead?
Yeah.
And so then really your cost is, because like the actual cost of giving out a download is pretty low. So like if that's a strategy where, you know, even if you get like a couple 100,000 at that point, who hasn't heard Radiohead, but like maybe people explore the album a little bit more and then you create new Radiohead fans, it's probably a better discussion for a smaller band that wasn't like one of the biggest bands in the world at the time they did that.
I would guess that number is low but exists.
Yeah.
Like, I think because it got so much press, people would have been like,
Yeah, I'll
"Ooh,
check
let's
this out. Who's this band, Radiohead?
The album was not chart eligible in the UK because of how it was released. However, due to record stores breaking street date arrangements, it entered the Billboard 200 at 156, and in its first week of official release, became the first independently released album to reach number 1 on the Billboard charts. And the album has allegedly, because no one really knows how to track it, it's allegedly sold 3 million copies since its release.
Allegedly.
It's allegedly has sold 1.25 million physical copies, and then the rest are downloads, pre-orders, who knows.
And a bunch of those are just you guys
Yeah.
just buying different versions of.
It's true. It is weird though, this album, though, like we talk about, you know, charts in every episode and like where albums charted. This is the first one that like genuinely doesn't have concrete data.
So Josh, you mentioned that off the top, this was the album, the Radiohead album that you wanted to do because it was the rare instance of you having these overwhelming expectations and the album meeting it. I'm curious, did it meet it immediately, or was it an album that kind of grew on you a little bit, or like right away was this, oh my God, it's exactly what I wanted?
I think my first listen, I was definitely sort of, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I wasn't sure what I was expecting at that point. You know, like hearing 15 Step and then hearing Body Snatchers and then hearing, I think Nude is the third track.
I think so. Yeah.
And then those are like all three very, very different tracks. And it was just sort of like I was trying to think of like how I would expect the record to go, like, and I had no idea. So it was like a little bit of panic, but it was also like really fun first listen.
I don't know about you. I remember feeling that it felt kind of slight at first.
I think what I was hoping for was sort of like this overarching statement, like a Kid A. Like something where it's like, this is going to alter my perception of music, man. You know, something like that. But what was really kind of shocking to me is that I think when people come up to me and ask like where to start with Radiohead, like I always had this like, you know, now start with the bands, move up, make your way. Now it's like In Rainbows is just clearly the most fun and accessible and like instantly listenable.
I also think it's
Radiohead
like,
record.
to your point, like it was always like, oh, you either start with the bands or you start with Kid A, because there's such different versions of
I like
the
this.
band.
We've got a Star Wars situation where you guys are machete ordering
Radiohead
Radiohead albums for a new Radiohead
but like
band.
In Rainbows is sort of the mix of the two.
Calling it the most fun and accessible, I think, is a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's definitely like if you're not already a Radiohead fan, or you just like want, you know, if it's less active listening, I think it's just like easy to throw on and like have. It's just fun.
And it's like they seem like more alive on this record. It's the first Radiohead record since the Bends that sounds like five guys in a studio.
I just think it's really funny that, you know, the band talked about how much like making this record almost broke the band. And it's like, oh, wow, they sound like they're having so much fun.
Yeah.
They don't sound miserable anymore.
It sounded fun for years.
Or they don't sound quite as miserable
Yeah.
anymore. Do you guys buy this weird conspiracy theory about it being a companion album to OK Computer? Have you guys heard this?
Have
like
heard
the
this,
binary
yes.
theory before?
I used to buy into this in my like, yeah, they're so brilliant. Now I'm like, no, there's no way.
I
this is
love
true.
conspiracy. So for anyone who doesn't know, the number 10 appears a bunch. It's announced it's released 10 days. There are 10 songs. It was 10 years after OK Computer, right?
Yep.
There was a user on Puddlegum, and I got this from Diffuser. They kind of broke down the conspiracy theory. Basically that if you go through all the ones and zeros, and then if you take each track from OK Computer and In Rainbows and alternate them, it makes the two albums really complementary. I think that that's probably something that someone just got really high and thought of. It's like, I love conspiracy theories like this, but I tried to listen to it. I don't see it.
See, here's the thing. I remember this theory. I also don't think it's true, but I have listened to it like that and like alternated tracks. And I don't know if it's just because both albums are really good, but like it works. Like it sounds so good.
Well, yeah, you're playing a bunch of Radiohead tracks.
I guess, but like
those are two of the best records.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's what it was, but I talked myself into it.
I really appreciate the sort of like they're using like it's either I can't like really place it. They're either like huge into like Lost conspiracy theories, which that show was airing at the time, or they're like super into like biblical scholars.
I think
you
that's
know, where it's like,
because
oh
it's
yeah,
all,
the numbers
it's all,
appear.
it's all
Yeah.
numerology,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, oh
Tom
yeah,
York
there are
is Jesus, and like
there are
putting that,
signs in the numbers.
Yeah, that
That's
seems
really like
crazy.
everything we've learned about Radiohead and Tom York in the last 13 years. It's like, oh, they just clearly fuck with people.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they put that much thought into as
No.
much as we all put into what they were doing. And they're like, we're a band. We just made a record. It was really hard. In April 2008, they released From the Basement, which was a really cool experiment where they just performed the album pretty much with, I think, bangers and mashes in there as well. It was broadcast at midnight on VH1, later released through iTunes. After In Rainbows, they went sort of on another hiatus to do their solo projects. Tom York released Adam for Peace. Phil Selway released his debut solo record in 2010. It's actually pretty good. Also in 2010, Tom York and Johnny Greenwood performed a surprise set at the Glastonbury Festival. The band released King of Limbs in February 2011, again as a download for the website. I think that album's aged really well. They embarked on a world tour, which unfortunately was marred by the stage collapse in Toronto at Downsview Park in 2012. After that tour, they went on hiatus again to work on all their projects. They released a Moon-Shaped Pool in May 2016. Hopefully in the next couple years we get some new music.
All right. we got to rank some Radiohead albums, which we've done a lot of album rankings in this segment. I know it's not an album ranking with a band every single time. You know, I don't think we've had people argue with us quite as much as we thought we may have.
Yeah, I don't think so.
There were a couple, I guess, where people disagreed, but I feel like this one maybe risks being most contentious.
I think there's just so many ways it can go.
Yeah. I guess we'll go to the guest first. What is your favorite Radiohead album?
My favorite Radiohead album is actually In Rainbows.
Okay.
Like my first favorite Radiohead album was Kid A. Like I sort of now like I think now that I like actually have to rank things for a living sometimes, like I sort of just like kind of go, it's like, what do I listen to more? You know, like
Well, that's
like,
the nice thing with older albums, right? It
Yeah.
gets a little easier with the benefit of distance.
obviously you want to put in like context, like how influential and paradigm shifting like both OK Computer and Kid A are. But do I listen to Kid A all the time? Absolutely not. You know, it's like you have to be in a very, very specific mood to be like, all right, I'm gonna put on Kid A.
I actually feel that way about Radiohead in general. And
Mhm.
even when I was at peak Radiohead, like they're
Right.
a band I love, but I never am just like, I'm gonna listen to Radiohead today.
I think I have like a once a year appointment with Radiohead.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
at this
exactly.
point in my life, like I exhausted it throughout high school. And it's like, because of this podcast, these past couple of weeks, I've been sort of diving back into the catalog. I'm like, why don't I listen to this all the time?
'Cause you
And
can't.
You can't. You really can't. I mean, it's funny. Like, why was I so emotionally drawn to this at 16? And now I like love it for like a couple weeks and then like go back to listening to like other bands that I loved around that time, like The Replacements and Pavement and stuff like that. And Wilco.
Jake, is In Rainbows your favorite Radiohead album as well?
It is, but wasn't always. It is now. For years, I was like the Kid A is the most important album guy. And I still think that's technically kind of true, but Kid A has fallen to second on my rankings. To your point, like I don't go back to Radiohead that often anymore. And when I do, I'm like, I'm going to listen to Radiohead for like 3 weeks. But if I am going back to a Radiohead album, it's always this one. I know saying best is objective and subjective, sorry, and not a real thing in a lot of ways,
Mhm.
because especially with music, it's just not a thing you can do. But like, I do think that the blending of sort of their guitar rock sound with their Kid A forward thinking sound is done so well on this record. And yet it's also a fun rock record, but it's also kind of sad. And like, it just hits all of their targets, I think, better than anything they've done.
It's their most versatile record for sure. It hits all of their like emotional beats of like, everything they've done over the career kind of distilled into
And, like,
this shortest record they've ever done.
And to your point, though, it's I think the only record in their discography that gives every member of the band sort of a chance to shine, which usually doesn't happen on a radio record because it's all just a sound.
For me, so I've never disliked Radiohead, but I haven't been like Radiohead is that band for me. I've never really I think I'm the world's only like casual Radiohead fan. Everyone else is either very hardcore or doesn't like them at all. So for me, In Rainbows is the one that I've probably listened to the most, just because, like our earlier discussion, it's a little more fun, it's a little more accessible. I think Kid A is likewise probably bigger and more substantial, but this one is more fun for someone who like hasn't had a huge attachment to the band and only drops in every once in a while. One thing that I came across as I was prepping for this episode, because I always, after I do my own rankings, I'll look up other rankings to kind of get a vibe for just how much we're going off the beaten course. And because Radiohead is a big band for people who are online, it's a big sports Twitter band. I looked up other people's rankings, and it seems that there's like, the impression that I got was that In Rainbows is probably the favorite of the people I follow and have at least tweeted about Radiohead albums. But there's also a counter current of this is a more recent thing, and it's only like everyone thought Kid A was better initially, and it's only recently that In Rainbows has started to pass it. And I'm curious if you guys agree with that and why you think that might be.
I do agree, but only because that was my experience.
Okay.
First of all, Kid A is 20 years old. And so like the sort of
Sure, but like look at the
immediacy.
podcast that we do.
No, I just mean, but in
20
terms
years
of like
old is not a-
the massiveness of it, I think we're not all looking at it like that Pitchfork review anymore, even though we all did at one time. I also think that you sort of, I'm speaking for myself here, and I don't mean to make this sound like universal truth, but like for me, as I get
I mean, you're kind of the target Radiohead audience.
For
so
sure,
it's fine.
absolutely.
It's probably fine for you to speak for other
Like,
people here.
For me, as I get older, like, I don't know if I want to listen to like the challenging stuff. I just want to be like, oh, Rainbows kicks ass.
Fair.
Yeah, definitely like growing up, I was definitely more into like big bombastic statements. And now as I get older, you know, like I think when I was a teenager, if I was like, oh yeah, the show was awesome, they played for 3 hours. Where now if it was like, oh, they played for 3 hours, oh no, I want to go to bed.
Yeah, we missed our bus back to Toronto from Hamilton because Green Day didn't stop playing.
Oh my God, yeah. And that sounds terrible at this point in my life, even though I love Green Day.
And that was a show we could sit down for.
Yeah. Oh. But, you know, and it's kind of the same with records. Like, I don't know. I think it might be just general jadedness, but I really love like a lean 36-minute record, you know?
Give me the one that slaps.
Yeah, I also think there's a like tendency when we're younger to like the records we're supposed to like.
Yes.
Like I remember when this came out, even though I liked it more than OK Computer immediately, it was always below OK Computer on my rankings because you were supposed to rank OK Computer and Kid A as the two best Radiohead. And like I think as we get older, we stop caring about what we're supposed to feel about music and appreciate what we actually do.
Yeah, it's quite a journey to get rid of that and grow past it. And we talked about it when we did our decade end list of like kind of trying to free yourself from how will this look looking back, or like you want an accurate list for posterity, but you also need to be pretty true and genuine about what you like the most. It's a tough. You mentioned OK Computer. Is that number 3 on both of your lists?
No.
Okay. So
I wonder if we have the same.
It went from being tied, being forced to be 1A and 1B with Kid A to now not making either of your top 3. Josh, what do you have at 3?
You know, I think at 3 is Hail to the Thief.
Okay.
Same.
Wow.
Are you good? Okay. Normally we'd only go like maybe 3 deep, but I'm curious just how far down you guys have the same rankings. Can I?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure you're not changing them up on the fly.
No, do it.
not that I would accuse you of that.
My thing with OK Computer is I think that I understand at the time it's like impact and resonance, but in 2020 it just sounds like a very good album, but not quite as like, oh, holy shit. But
so what would you have 4th then, Josh?
This changes every day. Well, not every day because I don't think about Radiohead every day. But I think every dude who likes indie rock probably thinks about ranking their Radiohead ranking list like once a year.
Yeah,
maybe twice a year if you're really into it. I think the more I listen, the more I don't know. It's King of Limbs probably.
So you guys finally differ here. Jake has King of Limbs 5.
I almost put it 4.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if I can put King of Limbs over OK Computer, but it's aging so well.
It's aging so well.
Still with the fealty to OK Computer.
I know.
Even further down the rankings.
Because like something in the last like 5 years, like when King of Limbs came out, I'm like, okay, clearly this is like down by Pablo Honey. I didn't really like it.
Same.
And then I saw him live on that tour and it was like, oh, this is genius.
Exactly
and then
also
coinciding around that time, I got very into electronic music.
Same.
You know, like
this is weird. This
I was, you know, Kid A was sort of like my gateway to, you know, and also Tom York's solo stuff. But I think, you know, independently of Radiohead, I just got really into, you know,
seeing them live with the two drummers and like the way they transform those songs from like these blippy things on record to these huge sounding rock songs almost.
Seeing it in a live performance was so like overwhelming. And I've seen Radiohead a couple times prior to the King of Limbs tour. But yeah, that was one of the best, not the best time I've seen them, but it sort of just blew my mind to see those songs in that context.
Yeah, like the In Rainbows tour, they played the amphitheater here in 2008. And to this day, that's one of the 5 best shows I've ever seen. It was so good. And then I saw them in Montreal on the King of Limbs tour because my final exam for the show was on a Friday night. My final exam for school, I was living in Toronto, was the Saturday morning. And so my buddy and I drove down Friday afternoon, saw the show. I wrote my exam in like an hour. Then we hopped back in the car to try and raced back to Toronto. We were doing like 180 down the 401. Got back to Toronto.
Relax, pup.
And as 401.
I know.
And as we like hit the city limits of Toronto, my buddy texted me being like, the show's not happening. We're like, and we thought he was fucking with us. And then it was the stage collapse and all that. But to your point, seeing those songs live completely changed my understanding of them. And it actually might be the Radiohead album I go back to the second most now. Like, even though I didn't like it when it came out at all.
Everyone has In Rainbows at number 1, which takes us back to that album. And Josh, what we normally do at this time is we pick a song from the album we've discussed to be on the show's mixtape. Generally, we let the guest guide this. We want one song from In Rainbows that either best represents the album or our discussion today, or just bangs the most and will fit well on the mixtape. So do you have any suggestions?
Well, you were talking about how you have a batting order theory of albums. You know, I'm a National League guy.
Okay.
So I'm going to say number 9, Jigsaw Falling Into Place.
play your favorite songs, your body disappears. No one could wind up like a spring before you had too much. Come back and focus again. The walls have been in shade. They got a Cheshire cat grin, all blurring into one. This place is on a mission before the night out. Before the animal noises closer get cameras. Before you come at all.
That was the first single off the record, and it
was?
But yeah, it wasn't like commercial. Like it was their first like song they released, quote unquote. As
Oh,
a
really?
single.
Okay.
Man.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Now, when
actually.
the NL does away with the DH, what are we going to do?
From the pit, yeah, when they get the DH, I don't know. Well, it will be the designated hitter once they change it.
Yeah, I guess that's
I don't
true.
know, but
Jigsaw's
I hate
a
to
great
say
song.
it. Yeah, I just think it sort of just is a bit firing on all cylinders. Like that song just like hits really hard.
I was thinking about, I was listening to that song on the way in today, and I had this thought that we've talked this before in mailbags about like go-to karaoke songs. Never seen it done, but I bet Jigsaw would be a kick-ass karaoke tune.
I want to give a plug to a Chicago band. I recently saw Lala Lala perform a cover of All I Need like
Ooh.
a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I was like, knowing this podcast was going to happen, I'm like, all right, cool. And their cover is fantastic. I think it's on YouTube.
Josh Terry, thank you so much for being with us
Yeah,
for
thanks, man.
a Radiohead episode.
This was a blast.
Yeah.
That was so
W-
fun.
The fortunate timing of you being in town for it.
Yeah.
It was great. Like, we've kicked around the idea of, like, could we do phoners with people? It's like, nah, we'll just have Josh in Toronto.
You just need Steve to invite people places.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I mean, it's not just Steve. We can invite people places, too. I have a couch.
That's true.
Yeah.
I have a couch.
I have an uncomfortable couch.
Guys, you can read Josh Terry at Vice and some other places as well if you want to go back to Billboard, Vinyl Me Please, Consequence of Sound, everywhere else you've written. You can also follow him at Josh H. Terry on Twitter. He's a great follow for music stuff and other stuff. We talked about Tom York being an elite poster earlier.
Yes.
Josh Terry, another
Great poster.
elite poster with us right here. Josh, thanks so much, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.